Hi, good morning. Good to see everybody. We're in the third week of a series going through the book of Daniel, the first 7 chapters, actually. I call it the faith that roars. Lions were a big deal in Babylon, and they're actually a big deal in Jerusalem and Israel, too. You remember there's a lion, the lion of the tribe of Judah. Have you ever heard that phrase before? And so the reason I call it the faith that roars is that even though Babylon is the empire, Nebuchadnezzar is the emperor, there are times where God, through his faithful servants, just roars back at Nebuchadnezzar that he alone is God, and this belongs to him. So that's kind of the idea behind the series. Now, how many of you know where most traffic accidents occur? Somebody in the first service said on the road, and that's true, but that's not what I'm looking for. In your car, that could be, okay. Most traffic accidents occur close to home, really close to home. 1 in 3 automobile wrecks occur within 10 miles of home. 2 in 10 occur within 1 mile of home. In fact, the closer you are to home, the more the following occurs. People back into fences, or they back into parked cars, or they run red lights accidentally, or they have minor or major accidents. Because the closer we get to home, especially from a long trip, we begin to relax. Everything seems really familiar. That's the reason why. Have any of you ever backed into a parked car? I have. I'm glad I'm not alone. Many years ago, my oldest child, her name is Brianna. She's 33 years old. She turns 34 on Tuesday. We're getting old. Anyway, so many years ago, she might have been 6 or 7 years old, something like this. We're at a restaurant with a bunch of other people from church, and she's running around playing, and she runs into the back of a chair that somebody's sitting in, and she hurts herself. And so I start to tell her, what would any good parent tell her? Sweetheart, you got to watch where you're going. You got to watch where you're going. You got to watch where you're going. I tell her all the way out to the car in the parking lot, sweetheart, you got to watch where you're going. Where I summarily back into a parked car. There we go. So you got to watch where you're going. That's the lesson of that. The problem is that with a lesson like today's, coming from Daniel chapter 3, the 3 Hebrew friends, Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego, in the fiery furnace, problem is that this can be so familiar to us that we don't pay attention. We become so familiar to us that we're not really paying attention to the details. And I assure you, that while what we learned as kids in Sunday school is important, the most important part really only comes to us as we're adults and we look at such a text again. So I'm asking you to sort of pay attention. In the meantime, what I want to do is give you a background, kind of a running start to Daniel chapter 3. In Daniel chapter 1, you may remember that Nebuchadnezzar with the Babylonian Empire had conquered Israel, and specifically Jerusalem, in 609, and he brought back a bunch of captives. And the captives he brought back were primarily young kids, maybe as old as 12 to 15 years old, and they were the royal kids. Left the royal families, the adults, back in Jerusalem, and kind of had a goal with this. If the parents who were separated by so many miles, if they dreamt of trying to get their kids back, Nebuchadnezzar could hurt them. But there was another goal as well. So he brought in these kids, and he wanted to remove their identity and replace it with something else. Time out for a moment. This morning, I have a picture of somebody I want to show you. It's a picture of Joel, the guy that was baptized. And when I asked for a picture, because we have 2 services, and I wanted to show the other service a picture of the person being baptized so they wouldn't see it, this is the picture he sent me. Now, you know Joel, but if you don't know me, you have to understand I'm a rabid Dallas Cowboy fan. And he sent me this. And in the text exchange between the 3 of us, somewhere in that, Joel said, and I can almost quote, I just wanted to represent the real America's team. So, here's what happened in the first chapter. Nebuchadnezzar brings these Jewish boys back, and he gives them Babylonian names. Takes away their Jewish name and gives them Babylonian names. He takes away their Jewish education, he gives them a Babylonian education. What he's doing is he's stripping them down. He's removing their identity, right? Because he's going to replace it with a new one. Right? And listen, I know that's cartoonish, but here's what AI does. The assimilation is in process. And so he wants to turn them into Babylonians so that the other Babylonian captives may get on board also. But they won't do it. Do you remember this? That they're fed all this food from the king along with all the education that they get. And among the food that they're getting is the meat and the wine. Now, not saying that meat and wine are sinful in and of themselves, but it so happens that the meat and the wine that he was serving these Jewish captives had been used in the worship of pagan gods. And so these four people, Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, said, we are not going to defile ourselves. We will not eat it. Instead, they only ate vegetables. And while vegetables, I might eat vegetables to lose weight. How about you? They ate only vegetables. And the word here just means stuff that was grown from the ground, okay? So they ate healthier things. And the passage goes on to tell us that after the period of test, when the king looked at them, it said they were fatter. But what that means in the Aramaic is they were beefier. Seems like they would have lost weight, but they were healthier looking. And so the veggies told, in a sense, they were the roaring of God, saying, these people belong to me, and I will roar when my people are faithful to me. Then we get to chapter 2, and you may remember that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and the dream was something he wouldn't tell anybody else about. He simply said, I need to know what the dream means. And so he brought in all his advisors and said, you have to tell me my dream and then tell me what it meant. They kept saying, no, tell us what your dream was and we'll tell you what it meant. He said, no, I will only trust you if you can tell me the dream without me telling you. Then when you tell me what it means, I'll believe you. They were scared of this. And Nebuchadnezzar told them, if you're not able to do it, I'm going to kill you. And the way the text reads is he would tear them limb from limb. That's important in a moment or two. He will tear them limb from limb, tear them to pieces. But Daniel comes into the scene, and he and his three friends pray, and God reveals the dream to him as well as the meaning. Now, I liken this statue here kind of like a bowling pin. And here's the reason I do, because when Daniel is telling Nebuchadnezzar the meaning of the dream, he not only tells him what each layer means, what each piece of metal means, he tells them that there's also going to be a big ball cut out of the mountains, clearly not by hands. And that big ball is going to come hit the statue at its feet, and it's going to be smushed. It's going to be shattered to smithereens, nothing left. And then that mountain or that ball itself is going to grow into a mountain to fill the whole earth, and that represents Christ. Now, when does that rock tear down that statue? At the end of what we call the empires of the Gentiles. That's what that statue represented. One was Babylon. The next one down was the Medes and Persians, and the next one down was the Greeks, and the next one down was the Romans. And at some point when that's over, when Christ returns, and that's what this mountain crashing the statue down and filling the whole earth represents, Christ's return. Okay, so you with me so far? And then in chapter 3 is what we call the burning conviction, the fiery furnace. So in order to do this, I want you to see some things that are repetitious, because I'm not going to repeat all of these. In 30 verses, this is a lot of things to be repeated. He repeats the word image, setup, fall down, worship, furnace, all those times. And then he gives these lists. And the lists can be quite long, so it gets very redundant to repeat all of these. I'll read them once, and then the next time they'll just be represented by an ellipsis. But here's something else I want you to see. This is going to be divided into 3 parts. The first one is they would not bow down. They would not bow. The second one is they would not bend. And the third one is they would not burn. Now, in order to get into these first 12 verses of chapter 3, I want you to back up just a little bit to get a running start. Here's how chapter 2 ended. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face. The king answered Daniel and said, "Surely your God is a God of gods." Now, this seems like a really important thing for Nebuchadnezzar to say, but I want you to notice the S on the end. You see, they were a believer of multiple gods, a plurality of gods. And so while this is a complimentary statement to Daniel's God, he's not saying that I am believing in one God only. He's simply saying, you know what? He's a bigger God even compared to my gods than I realized. That's all he's saying. So he's not only a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since you've been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king promoted Daniel, gave him many great gifts, made him a ruler over the whole province, and he even advanced in another verse these three friends, Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego. And then we open chapter 3, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold. An image of gold. Now, we don't know what these images look like, so the one that you see, well, we won't go for those. The one that you saw before and this one right here are representatives. The statue had 4 gold pieces in the dream. The one that Nebuchadnezzar actually made physically had one type of metal. The entire thing made of gold. Now, it very well may have been made of wood on the inside and inlaid with gold, but it still would be a lot of gold. This is in some way representing Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom. Now, nowhere in chapter 3 does it tell us that the statue is of Nebuchadnezzar. It never reveals the face of it. In fact, I would argue it's representing his gods, but he represents his gods. Now, watch what it says next. The height of the statue, was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. That means that this statue was really tall and thin, 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. Tall and thin. You're probably thinking of me. I'm a pretty good representation of that. And notice he says that he set it up on what's called the plain of Dura. Now, Dura is just a common Aramaic word that means wall. So it could have been set up in an area where there was a building which had a big wall, but it could also be referring to the canyons in the area, so that the canyon top was like the top of a wall. And this is important because what is he going to throw Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego into? Fire furnace. He's going to throw them into it. So the furnaces typically had an opening at the top that would be accessed by throwing things in it from the top of that wall. And then at the side of it, on the ground level, it had a door. So Nebuchadnezzar's view was probably from the door on ground level, but they were thrown into the top of it. Okay, feeding air into it and so forth and so on. So then you get one of these lists in verse 2. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, sent word to assemble the satraps and the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. He wants everybody involved. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language." Because this was an empire. He's collecting people from lots of different places, lots of different backgrounds. That at the moment you hear, here's another one of those long lists. I'm going to read it here, but I won't read it again later. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, apparently the Scottish were there. Bagpipe? No, so we don't think that the Scottish were there. However, this word is translated as bagpipe, and you have to understand that when you're reading an ancient language, you don't necessarily have all of the equal meanings to those words available to us. Sometimes we translate it based on our best understanding, and then discoveries are made. Turns out that this Aramaic word may best be represented by some sort of percussion instrument, kind of like a drum, okay? Doesn't matter. The point is that when they play the music, you're to fall down and worship this golden image. Look at verse 6. There's a consequence if you don't. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. Now we know that Nebuchadnezzar did throw people into the fiery furnaces. There have actually been some discoveries of these furnaces in the area of Shinar, or at least what we understand is the land of Shinar. There was also a clay tablet, a clay cylinder that was discovered where Nebuchadnezzar himself, it's like a government thing, and this was in the ruins of Babylon itself, where Nebuchadnezzar is talking about an event just like the one described here in Daniel chapter 3. It goes all the way back to the 6th century. So there was a consequence. You notice what's happened. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to worship when the music starts, and if you don't, you're going to die. Now, what's the object of worship? There's the statue that is representing the gods of Nebuchadnezzar and perhaps Nebuchadnezzar himself. But what happened with King Neb? I mean, when we looked at the end of chapter 2, he was singing some fairly high praises of God. Well, the first thing is, it was not really a complete surrender to God. You may remember he said, your God is a God of gods. So he didn't completely understand what he was saying. Number 2, years had passed from that event. How many years? Most likely 8 years had passed between the end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3. But, you know, when time passes, sometimes we don't own up to the commitments that we made in the past. Have you ever noticed that? And then there's something else that happened. In those years, Nebuchadnezzar was almost killed. There was an attempted assassination on Nebuchadnezzar, and we have documents and cylinders from Babylon and that era, that time. So we know that he was almost assassinated. So what we're seeing here in chapter 3 could very well be Nebuchadnezzar's way of saying, despite what the dream said about me, and these people are trying to end my empire and me right now, I'm just going to let everybody know that I'm going to last longer than that. And so I am going to require absolute loyalty. And the way I'm going to gauge loyalty is that you worship my God supremely. And so he sets up this statue. This sets the stage for an enormous challenge to the people of God, though. The first and second commandments say, you shall have no other gods before me. And you shall not make for yourself an idol. And you're not going to worship or serve them. Which put Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego in a very precarious position. Preserve my life by bowing, or let my life end by not bowing, because my God, the one I believe in, said not to do this. Therefore, at that time, when all the peoples heard the sound of all those instruments of the music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. All seems pretty good. Can you imagine the plain out in the desert? All of these people and all of their heads bowing at that time when the music starts. But not everybody, as it turns out. For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans, Babylonians, came forward and brought charges against the Jews, referring to these 3 Hebrew Jewish people, Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego. I cannot tell you how important this phrase right here is to this text. If we were to translate it literally, it may not make sense. It literally means they ate their pieces. Isn't that interesting? Do you remember how they were going to be killed in chapter 2? They were going to be torn limb from limb. Have you ever heard the word piecemeal? Do you know what that means? It's talking about a process of doing something. And what this word means is that they had a process toward which they were trying to destroy these 3 Hebrews. They ate their pieces. It means that they had great malice toward them. And we don't know exactly why. In chapter 2, it's the Hebrews who saved their bacon when they couldn't tell what the dream was or what it meant. And there may be some jealousy over that. Maybe other things have happened. They may just think, you know, these Jewish people that only believe in one God, What is up with that? And now they're ruling over these large areas. We have all these gods, and our God defeated them. Why should they be uplifted? So we don't know exactly what it was, and the text never tells us specifically why they wanted to eat their pieces. But one thing's very clear. Built into the meaning of this phrase, translated, brought charges against the Jews, eat their pieces, it means that there was malice toward these Jews. They wanted to bring harm to them. And they responded, these Chaldeans, and they said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, "O king, live forever." And as much as that sounds like they're brown-nosing him, that was a typical way of approaching an empire's ruler. But I do think they made a mistake in something they said. Watch this. They say, "You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound," and lists all the instruments of music, "is to fall down and worship the golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of the furnace of a blazing fire." And then they say, "There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration." What did you catch that? There are certain Jews whom you, Nebuchadnezzar, this is your fault. Probably not a wise approach. Have appointed over the administration, namely Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. These men, O king, have degraded you by not bowing and worshiping the image. They are disregarding Nebuchadnezzar himself. They do not serve you or your gods or worship the golden image which you've set up. So there are a lot of observations we can make from it. I want to just point something else out here that we talked about last week. That statue with all the metals, gold, silver, bronze, and iron with clay, are representing what the Bible calls the time of the Gentiles. And the time of the Gentiles is going to last until the time of Jesus, the second return, the second coming of Jesus. And so between now and Christ's return, we're still in the time of the Gentiles, which means that during this period of time, and yes, even for us, there will be times when the world system will sort of try to force us to believe things that are not biblical, or try to get us to worship things that are not God. And they will try to get us to make our own faith more private so that we're not sharing it with anyone else. Okay? And that's all these observations talk about. But there's something really critical here. If I could just sort of reduce these first 12 verses, here's what I'd reduce it to. The king demanded his gods be worshiped. And what we have here is called the oppression of pluralism. Have you ever heard the term pluralism? Now, sometimes we mistake pluralism for something else. For example, we live in the United States of America, and here there is religious freedom. We all agree? I think the religious freedom is a good thing, which means that I have the freedom to choose what religion I'm going to adhere to, which one I believe, and therefore the freedom to practice that. However, that's different than pluralism. Pluralism is when there are multiple beliefs and two or more are being projected to be over and above all the others, in a sense that you are forced to adhere to certain religion. Okay? Did you notice what the king was doing? He was saying that you can't worship your God, Jew. Basically, you can go home and worship him, but when you're out here and you hear the music, you worship the one that I set up. Now, that's a dangerous thing. And I don't know about you, but I can think of several circumstances where people have sort of been forced into beliefs. I'm just going to think of for a moment a baker, a florist, and a web designer. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? And there was a consequence to not bowing. Now, most of what we face here in this nation is really mild compared to what a lot of the world has to face. But there are still ways that the world is trying to force people of belief, believers, Christians, into their belief systems, okay? So this is not going to be the last time either that this happens. In fact, there's going to be a huge moment. Let me take you to Revelation chapter 13. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Does that sound a little bit like Daniel 3? And he causes all, the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves, to be given a mark on the right hand and on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. There's going to be a consequence to not worshiping what this beast is telling us we have to worship. Now, the beast in question here, there are actually two beasts in Revelation chapter 13. One of them is what we call the Antichrist. Have you heard of the Antichrist? And the second one is like the prophet of the Antichrist. And it's the prophet trying to enforce this. But I'm just telling you that until the day that the times of the Gentiles ends, and it hasn't ended in Revelation 13, the world will try to force us into this. And the scripture speaks of a time when there will be a person who actually props himself up as God and forces worship of him at the cost of dying if we refuse. Okay, so it won't be the last time. Remember Exodus chapter 20, have no other gods before me, and do not have an idol or worship it. Here's the second section. They would not bend. So here Nebuchadnezzar is in rage and anger. In other words, he's really hot under the collar, okay? He's really upset. And he gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I've set up? This is a really important sentence in this chapter. Is it true? What? Is what true? That you do not serve my gods. Here we see direct evidence that he's not telling them they can't worship their God. He's simply telling them that they must worship his gods first. Now, if you're ready, Nebuchadnezzar continues, at the moment you hear the sound of all that music, fall down, worship the image that I've made, well, that's great. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? Here's another statement that is giant, and it shows you the arrogance of King Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, he believes in multiple gods. He believes that his God defeated the Jewish God. And here he says, what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? He's about to get his answer. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us. Now, I want you to look at verse 17 very carefully. When we look at this text casually, we come away with a particular message that's probably short of its actual meaning. Let me tell you how we usually take it. If we're just faithful to God, then he will keep us from all problems. Is that the way it works? Anybody here ever have problems? Let me name a couple of people. Mary and Joseph. Have you ever thought about, I mean, we sort of whitewash that and we make it really pristine and clean and full of fun and joy and, oh, it's awesome. But do you ever consider the trouble they went through? And do you know why they went through that trouble? It wasn't because they were bad. It's because they were faithful. God trusted them with it because of their faithfulness. Now look at what these three Hebrews say. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand. So he's able to deliver from the fire. He's able to deliver us out of your hand one way or the other, whether by life or by death. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. It's really quite remarkable. They're not saying, God is going to free us from this burden if we just have enough faith. They're saying God is capable of keeping us from the flames. He's capable of keeping us in the flames. But even if he uses the flames to bring us home, we worship him alone. It's very important. All sorts of things we could learn from them. So I'm going to kind of bypass that and just get to this. If I could distill it again, the Hebrews will worship only God, and they will do it at the cost of everything. Notice what they're valuing over the other. They're valuing God even over themselves. I call this the object of worship. Let me ask you, do you worship God because he's God, or do you worship what God can possibly give you? Do you worship who he is, or do you value more what he has? See, this is a common human problem, and we see it lots of places, this whole idea of what's in it for me. And it can look really genuine at times. Take you back to John chapter 6. He's fed the thousands. He did that more than once, and this is one of those times. So when the crowd saw that Jesus was not there, which means that after he fed the thousands this time with a little bit of fish and a little bit of bread, he got up and left. He went in the boat to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, to a place called Capernaum. So when the crowd saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they themselves got into small boats and came to Capernaum seeking Jesus. And when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Now, listen closely to Jesus' response. Jesus answered them and said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you seek me not because you saw signs, not because you saw evidence of who I am, not because of who I am, but because your bellies were filled. You didn't come seeking me, you came seeking what I can give you, what you want from me." The three Hebrews in Daniel 3 are saying we are seeking God alone. Which brings us to the final section of Daniel 3. They would not burn. But you already know that, don't you? Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Have you ever noticed when somebody's face was altered? No, seriously. Have you ever seen anybody else's face altered? I can think of several instances where I've done something to upset my wife, and her face was altered right there before me. Her facial expression changed. It's kind of scary. Well, that's kind of what we're seeing here. His facial expression changed. It's altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it actually was heated. And they didn't have a dial on this thing. So the 7 times is a euphemism for turn it up as high as you can get it. And estimates are they were able to turn it up to about 1,500 degrees. But again, that's a guesstimate based on studies. We don't know that for sure. One thing we do know for sure from this is that he wanted these 3 Hebrews to experience the heat that he was feeling under his collar. He was mad, and he wanted them to feel that fury. So turn it up 7 times. He commanded in verse 20 certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. And these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and their other clothes, and were cast into the midst of the furnace. What this tells us is that he did this in haste. He didn't waste any time. See, these aren't the only people Nebuchadnezzar ever threw into a furnace. And what we know is that they usually took all their belongings, took all their clothing off of them, but they didn't want to waste any time. They've really ticked him off. He's going to throw them into the fire just as they are. Look at verse 22. For this reason, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew the men who carried them up there. But these 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace, still tied up. And Nebuchadnezzar the king, astounded, stood up in haste. He sees something, and he says to the high officials, Was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire? And they replied to the king, certainly, king. But he said, look, I see 4 men loose and walking about in the midst of the fire with them. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is not a Christian. Nebuchadnezzar is not Jewish. He's not real privy to Jewish texts. And so we cannot take his word as a pagan like we might Jewish scripture or a Jewish prophet. So when he refers to this person that he sees the 4th one as the son of the gods, notice it's got the S on the end. This is simply saying that he looked to Nebuchadnezzar as some sort of divine image. He wasn't saying this is one of the gods. And the reason I bring that up is because scholars debate, even to this day, whether this 4th person was an angel, which is what Nebuchadnezzar is going to call him in a few verses, or whether this 4th person was actually the pre-incarnate Jesus. Now, the truth is, we can't say for sure from the text. I think it's the pre-incarnate Jesus, but we can't prove that from the text. Someone that wasn't human, so it could have been an angel. Nebuchadnezzar sees this. And Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the furnace of the blazing fire, and he responded to them by their name. And he said, come out. And notice he calls them servants of the Most High God. Now, I want you to notice how this is worded. If a Jewish person said this, it might mean exactly what we want it to mean. But because Nebuchadnezzar is saying it, it only means that their God at this moment is viewed as higher than all the other gods that Nebuchadnezzar worships. Okay? Now, I'm going to make the argument next week that Nebuchadnezzar actually comes to faith. But it's a process. It's not happening right here. So they came out of the fire. The satraps, prefects, the governors, the king's officials, all that list again, and they see all of this has happened. And I want you to notice the men that they regarded these men that the fire had no effect on their bodies of even these men, nor was their hair of their heads singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had they the smell of fire even upon them. Not even the smell. This is pretty amazing. A few years ago, my wife and I were going out on a double date. We were meeting another couple at a restaurant. And on the way there, my son, Connor, called his mom. And the question that he asked her was, because we had 2 dogs, and the dog food for one of them was from a vet, and it needed to be heated a little bit. And so the question that my son asked was, Mom, how long do I heat this dog food? And she told him, 15 minutes. And he said, 15 minutes? She said, yes, 15 minutes. And I swear this conversation went on about 15 minutes, and both of them going, 15 minutes? Yes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes. This is your mother, I'm telling you, 15 minutes. When we got home, she realized that she meant 15 seconds. Have you ever smelled dog food heated for 15 minutes in the microwave? There was literally this dog food particled smoke all through the house. And we smelled like burnt dog food we probably still smell like burnt dog food, but we smelled like burnt dog food. But these guys were in the flames. And there's no scent of it on them at all. You ever been to a campfire? When you walk away from that, especially if you're downwind and you've got that smoke in you, you can smell it. You can go eat certain kinds of food and you come home with fajita smell on you or whatever it is, Indian spices smell all over you. There's nothing on them. Not a hair is singed. None of the clothing is damaged. If you think that Nebuchadnezzar's face changed before, it must have been exasperated and shocked upon seeing this. What do you think it said to him? Well, Nebuchadnezzar responded, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel." Here he refers to that entity as an angel. And notice what he says next. Who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command and yielded up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God. And then what he does is he goes on And he talks about how no one can speak ill of this God, the God of the Hebrews. Now, it does not indicate that he gets it yet, that he's saved. It just means that he's getting closer and closer to it. He's kind of like my friend Joel in the Patriots outfit, and it's being removed from him, that current identity, and some perspective of who God really is becoming increasingly clear in his mind as that God, or that Lion of the tribe of Judah, keeps roaring out. Does that make sense? So they wouldn't burn. Distilling this as much as possible, I would say these few verses are telling us God alone is worthy of worship. There's no one else worthy of any worship. God alone is worthy of worship. How much worship? All worship. Watch this. The outcomes of suffering. But the typical outcome from a human being going to a fiery furnace is going to be burnt skin and death. What was their outcome? No smell, no singes, no burn. But I told you, this message is not God will save us always as long as we're faithful to him. It's that God is always faithful, and we have to trust him regardless of what he chooses to do. Now, God requires faithfulness, and he's going to develop his people through their faithfulness. I want you to watch this closely. Psalm 115, not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name give glory. Can we give it to anyone else? Now, it doesn't say that in this text, but it's what it's insinuating. Only to God, only God gets glory because of your loving kindness, because of your truth. But look at this verse from Exodus chapter 20. You shall not worship them, speaking of the idols, or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Now, I thought jealousy was a problem. Have you ever been jealous? I've been jealous. Why is it that God can be jealous, but I can't? Well, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. His name is Ron Dennis. Ron is a retired architect, really quite a guy, kind of a James Bond kind of a guy. He built hospitals, huge hospitals all over the world. His house is really neat. He's got all kinds of cool hobbies. He's got the biggest train set I've ever seen. He put it all together, flies all kinds of planes. He's the only person I know personally who has an elevator in his home. This is a really neat guy, big house, right? And a few years ago, he bought this Alfa Romeo. I have heard of Alfa Romeo. I've never known anybody who owned one before. And so he gave me a ride in it 2 or 3 times. And every time I'm just like awestruck. This is really cool. The inside was beautiful. It would do things that I've never seen any other car do before. It was pretty great. And let's say that I decide, because I like it so much, and wouldn't you agree it's a pretty car too? Let's say that I decide at some point I want to borrow his car. And this really shocked Dennis. He wasn't ready for that, but I wanted to borrow his car, and I drove it around, and I enjoyed it, and I didn't give it back on time. In fact, I waited so long, and I liked it so much, which is why I kept it so long, that I decided I wanted to just keep it for myself. And so I was driving around town telling people how this Alfa Romeo is my Alfa Romeo. Don't you like my Alfa Romeo? And when Dennis caught wind of this, he was kind of upset about it, okay? He was mad because he hears that I'm going around town saying, this is my Alfa Romeo, isn't it great? But it's not my Alfa Romeo, it's Ron's, right? He was jealous. Now, if I'm jealous of Ron's Alfa Romeo, that's a bad jealousy. But if Ron is jealous because I have stolen his Alfa Romeo, that is a righteous jealousy because the Alfa Romeo belongs to him. Do you see the difference? That text said that we give God glory, and it's insinuating only God. We worship God, and we worship God only. Why only? Because all glory and all worship rightly belongs to holy, holy, holy God. If we give it anywhere else, if we place it anywhere else, if we give it to someone or something else, he is jealous of it because it belongs to him. It's his. No one is deserving of it. Anytime we think someone or something is, we're mistaken. Only he is holy and worthy. Malachi chapter 3. This is going to seem not to connect at first, but bear with me. He will sit as a smelter and purifier of silver, and he will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver. Why? So that they may present to the Lord offerings in righteousness. It seems to be saying that unless that impurity is removed, there is no genuine righteousness to present. Do you see that? Do you realize that the fire for a believer has a refining property? That when we are faithful to him, no matter what the consequence, it separates the inert ingredient from us and leaves only the genuine. Like with gold or silver, it removes the dirt. It removes the little plant that's in it. And they scoop it out so that all that's left is pure gold, pure silver. This is a $10 word we use in church a lot. It's the word sanctification. Have you ever heard that before? He's in the process of purifying us, of sanctifying us. The moment we place our faith in Christ, we are as good as purified, but he's still in the process from that moment until we see him face to face of burning out, smelting out all of those impurities, sanctifying us. But fire is painful, isn't it? Thing is, we can't escape the fires. But if we'll be faithful, it will refine us. It will always reveal what or who we truly value. In fact, the word worship, we use it a lot. Have you ever used the word worship before? I've used it probably a dozen times this morning. Do you know what it means? It means worthy. The right response to who God is a recognition and exaltation of his infinite eternal worth. And his worth is greater than even our physical lives. Now, how many of you believe that at the close of this physical life, that's all there is? There's heaven, right? So even if something costs me here, it has not cost me eternity. Let me ask you, have you ever considered the fact that while he doesn't always keep us from the fires, the troubles in our life, he can even use them to refine us because he has already gone through the fire on our behalf. The death, the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection. See, it's through the evidence of who he is, it's through the reality that he is himself God, that we can be faithful to him even in the hottest fires that we'll face. I pray he finds me faithful, and you as well. Father, thank you for your word. I do pray that you find us faithful. I know this is not a fun message, but it is a reflection of what you teach us in Daniel 3. And I can't imagine the roar of that lion's voice when Nebuchadnezzar saw the three Hebrew friends alive, unsinged, no smell, and the shock from the roar of who was that fourth person with them. Father, if there's anyone in this room that does not yet know you, maybe they have an idea of who you are, but they've never placed their faith in you, I pray that you would lead them to do that. And we still would give you all the glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.